Hey everyone, this is Destiny from the Chronic Illness Therapist podcast, and I have a new piece of content for you. If you are tired of feeling alone in your chronic illness journey, I've got you covered. In my newsletter, Mentally Well While Chronically Ill, I've taken the most common themes I see in the chronic illness community and turned it into helpful letters for you. When you sign up, you'll receive insights, tips, and resources right into your inbox every month. In each edition, I get into topics that matter the most. So most recently, I'm giving you my tried and true tips for preventing flare-ups. So feel free to sign up for that list with one of the free download links in the show notes below. And if you choose the Mastering Pacing download, you'll immediately get a PDF and worksheet to help you discover why pacing is so hard for us and also how and why it's important to do. So again, the free download links are below in the show notes. The Chronic Illness Therapist podcast is meant to be a place where people with chronic illnesses can come to feel heard, seen, and safe while listening to mental health therapists and other medical professionals talk about the realities of treating difficult conditions. This might be a new concept for you, one in which you never have to worry about someone inferring that it's all in your head. We dive deep into the human side of treating complex medical conditions and help you find professionals that leave you feeling hopeful for the future. I hope you love what you learn here, and please consider leaving a review or sharing this podcast with someone you love. This podcast is meant for educational purposes only. For specific questions related to your unique circumstances, please contact a licensed medical professional in your state of residence. Matthew Reeves is a certified rehabilitation counselor and psychotherapist working in Atlanta, Georgia, and was diagnosed with a genetic retina disease when he was a child. This condition progresses to legal blindness, and it did in his teen years. When he decided to change careers and enter the world of counseling later on in his life, he pursued expertise in helping those with chronic illness and disability. Now, in addition to private practice, Matthew works with a regional center helping to equip those with blindness and low vision. While the agency focuses on mobility and life skills training, Matthew helps these clients move through the emotional process of grief and adjustment to life with limited vision. Despite profound vision loss, Matthew's first career was in stage design and engineering, and he enjoyed finding ways to defy expectations, becoming the only blind lighting designer he knows of. Then he joined the ranks of many fellow folks with disabilities and earned his advanced degree to launch his second career. This episode was probably my most personal episode that I've ever recorded. I talk about a very deeply personal relationship in my life, and it was very clear to me, while I am not the one with vision loss, my dad is, it was so clear to me how much Matthew knows exactly what his clients are going through. Obviously, he has his own experience with it, but lived experience isn't really enough. We also have to do a lot of the emotional work that comes along with living with some of these chronic conditions, with all of our chronic conditions. So it was really an honor to talk with Matthew and to have him articulate so clearly the experience that people have when they live with low vision and blindness. So I hope that you all really appreciate and enjoy this episode. And if you have any questions or are looking to find Matthew and his practice and live in the state of Georgia, please feel free to reach out to him at his contact info in the show notes. Also, I wanted to make a request for those who are willing and have some time. I'm creating a new course, and it's about pacing ourselves and learning how to slow down, essentially so that we can speed up and get everything done that we want to get done. I know a lot of us really struggle with the crash and burn cycle and doing a whole lot of things because we don't want to miss out or we really want to get something done, and then we kind of crash and burn and are down and out for hours, days, or sometimes weeks. And if that is something that you experience, I would really appreciate talking to you on video or the phone. I have a link that's going to be in the show notes, as well as the free download links and everything. You can find everything down below. But this call is going to help me figure out kind of exactly which pieces are relevant to you all. And the more people I talk to, the more I can see themes. When several people say the same thing, it's like, okay, this is the most important piece that needs to be in the course. So I would love to talk to you all. And if you're interested in helping me out, you will also get the course for free when it comes out. So please feel free to book a call below. And in the note of the call, just tell me if you prefer phone or video. All right. Thanks so much. And now on to the episode. So why don't you start by telling us about who you are, where you practice, what you do with clients and for clients, and anything that feels relevant, to your own kind of who you are and what you do.
For sure, yeah. I'm a career changer. So in my mid 40s, I decided to pursue becoming a counselor. And um, when I learned that there was such a thing as a clinical rehabilitation counselor, that really caught my attention because it allowed me to do all the things any other counselor can do, plus additional training for disability and chronic illness. And that really caught my attention because I'm legally blind and I have been since early adolescence. So it's like a real population I really care about, and I feel like I had, maybe an additional insight into how to help people through a difficult transition in their lives. So after I got my license, I approached a local Atlanta nonprofit that does a lot of work with the visually impaired, and I asked to partner with them. And the reception I got was just unqualified and positive. They went out and actually got a grant to help pay for a pilot program. So now about half my time is spent working with their clients that they send my way, and those clients have to pay very, very little because many of them are low socioeconomic status. Um, and we get to a pretty decent handful of sessions to process through the work they do or the work they need to do to not get stuck in a really difficult situation. And I've noticed, well, for one thing, I've noticed that they tend to respond really well because of the common experience that they and I have had. But in doing this work, I'm starting to notice a lot of themes that are related to vision loss. Some of them overlap with general disability and general chronic illness, things of that nature. Some of them I think are a little more specific to vision loss. But these same themes keep cropping up over and over again, and they all, or not all, but most of them tend to relate to kind of this specific kind of grieving process that a lot of these clients are going through. And I went through it as a kid, as an adolescent. So I think my experience was a little different because I didn't lose as much. For example, I've never driven. So that loss of independence was different for me than for somebody who has to stop driving when they're 40, you
Yeah.
know. But
What?
there are some definite common themes that I'm noticing.
Yeah, I'm curious, what are some of those themes that come up?
The um, the first is how the loss, the sense of isolation. Um, and what I mean by that, and this is multi-factor, but when we use the word grief out, not as therapists, but out in the world, I think like probably upwards of 90% of the time, people are talking about the grief due to the death of somebody, right?
Right.
And what do we do when somebody dies? We gather together, we have ritual, we look at photographs, we have meals together, we laugh together, we cry together, and we've all lost in some way the same thing, right? When we've all lost, the relationships are different, of course, but we've all lost granddad and we've lost the same person. With vision loss, it's different because the person is losing something that no one else around them has lost. While there are a lot of people with low vision or no vision in our general population, the percentage is very small. So very few people have experience um, grappling with this. And there's very few people around that the person can reach out to and find commonality. I think it's one reason why support groups are so useful for this particular experience. But your loved ones generally don't have that experience. So they're relying on you to tell them. And that takes you to the next problem. And that is, it is really difficult to put into words what the experience is like. like a lot of pain, this usually isn't accompanied by physical pain, although it can be. Um, but I've had low vision. I've been legally blind for 40 years almost, and I still have a hard time answering the question, what can you see? Like that is really difficult to put into words. It's not, people think it's like just like take the camera lens out of focus or put a black sheet or a bandana over their eyes. That's not what vision loss is like, and it's very different for everyone. So that communication is essential for getting connection and also extraordinarily difficult.
Do you work with clients to try to verbalize that, not from the sake of like trying to, so that they can help other people understand even, but more so from a place of what it means, like the empowerment we feel when we are able to explain an experience, or is that not really that relevant in this case?
I'll be honest, in most of the conversations, I'm not getting much of a draw towards that as a goal.
Okay.
What does seem impactful is the normalization of that. Like this is hard, and acknowledging that it's hard, and it's not just hard for them, it's hard for everybody who goes through this. And I think that is the thing that means more than actually trying to find words. And just as a little tangent, I have found that it's useful to, instead of answering the question, what can or I can't I see, it it's a little more accessible to approach it from the standpoint of what is challenging to do.
Yeah,
That seems to be a little easier to grapple with, but it also is a layer removed from the identity. So it may be helpful, but it's not quite there. So it's still a challenge.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I've noticed about the grieving process that is really tricky, and I think this is true of a lot of progressive illnesses and chronic illnesses, when there are a lot of vision conditions that are progressive, and sometimes they're extraordinarily slow, like mine, for example. Um, and it can take decades for the disease to fully progress to a point of either stability or complete vision loss. So, and I've had a lot of clients talk about how, I feel like I'm going through the grieving process, and then there's the next thing I can't do, and then I have to mourn that all over again. And it's like the scab is constantly getting picked at, and it makes it very challenging. And it feels like you can get really stuck in the grieving process because you never really get a chance to say, okay, that's over. I've accepted it now. Now there's a whole new thing to accept again. I
Right.
I tell clients, it's like, of course this is hard. This is like if this were somebody who died, it's like you're trying to grieve and mourn, but you're living in the house with the corpse of the person, like constantly being reminded of the loss. I have also, I think it's somewhat, and I haven't experienced this myself, but as I understand it, like dealing with the grieving process as somebody's going through Alzheimer's or a really progressive cancer or a slowly progressing cancer, I think there's some similarities there that I think again it's helpful for my clients to normalize and go, yeah, this is hard. This is legitimately hard, and you're not broken. This is tough.
Yeah, yeah. Can can you speak to that piece of feeling broken? Like what are people experiencing within that? Can you even describe what it means to feel that way, or what, or how you work with clients, what you do in that case?
Yeah, I think working with other relationships in their lives to try to communicate what they're going through is crucial, because hopefully most of the time somebody who's dealing with this has a community around them that wants to be supportive. They just don't quite know how. And I do find that human connection is the single most important aspect of getting unstuck. So it's a lot of internal work, but it's a lot related to connection with others as well. So we do talk a lot about that, how to regain connection in the process of going through something that feels so isolating, um, and trying to communicate. And that has its own challenges that we've noticed together, the clients and I. Um, it's not just a question of answering that question, what can I see or what can I do or what is this like? The loved ones are going through their own grieving process, and it's one that's even more confusing for them because it's one step removed. They want to be compassionate, they do care, they are losing something. Their loved one's vision loss is impacting their life. They're suddenly in a position that they were never anticipating when they got into a relationship, in the case of like a significant other. um, and their own grieving process, because there's this delay, because it has to be communicated, like it's not a first person primary experience. They're having to learn, and it seems like they're always two steps behind the person who's losing the vision. So while the client is going through their own journey of grieving and they might be approaching acceptance, their loved one might still be in denial. For example, both parties might go through this phase where, they've been diagnosed, like I'll use my condition as an example. I've been dealing with this for decades, and I still see headlines constantly when you pay attention to the science, like, oh, there's something on the horizon that seems really exciting, right? We're
I'm
we're,
sorry,
we're
sir.
making strides. These research is so exciting. Be optimistic. That can be an anchor in the denial phase. Like, not saying hope is bad. Hope is always a wonderful thing, but it can get in the way if it's just this perpetual state where you want to say, oh, maybe I don't have to deal with this. Maybe I don't have to deal with
Yeah.
it. Maybe I don't have to deal with this. And then once you get to a place where you say, I guess I do have to deal with this, which is a hard process to go through. Now you've got your aunt sending you news clippings that she saw about maybe you don't have to deal with this, right? So the people around you with the best of intentions always seem to be a little bit delayed in what they're going through. And now you're having to, be the source of support. And that can lead you to some anger, like, I've already been with this, don't you understand why are it's very common to receive these efforts to be helpful, and they really are like picking at the scab, and then the person who's trying to be helpful doesn't understand. So it requires this really nuanced, compassionate, empathetic communication bidirectionally, which both parties are struggling to do because they're both very emotional, and they're both very scared. The whole process is terribly scary. And so we're, generally speaking, it's hard to find that energy to find calm and approach these conversations with that self energy that I love to talk about, that calm and compassion, and where the intellectual part of the brain is online, because so often we're in a fear response, in a threat response. Losing one's vision is terribly scary. It is a threat to our physical safety. So when it's new and it's fresh, it's hard to have those conversations. So a lot of the work that I try to do with the clients is to acknowledge what is safe and what is not, and how to not be in a threat response so that you can engage with other people. And so you can engage with yourself and your own emotions, that what you're feeling is legitimate and valid, and that the emotions themselves are not dangerous. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of the work that we do as therapists, not just in
Yeah.
response, but
No, but you've spoken to some really key points that do stand out specifically for folks who are losing their vision or have lost their vision entirely. What are some pieces of advice you might have for the family member who wants to send these articles or wants to share their emotional load,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the an important question for both my client and their loved ones is, what what do you need? What do I need? And that's on the part, both questions apply to both parties. Like, if I'm the person who's losing my vision, what kind of support do I need right now? And that may be different 6 months from now. So having those open lines of communication is really important, and listening to the answer to that. I may not want you to send me news clippings about my condition. Like, trust me, I'm paying more attention to that than you are, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's almost minimizing when somebody sends you something that's not even relevant, or it's something you saw 3 weeks ago. It's almost like, I don't know, it makes it feel like a disconnect sometimes. On the other hand,
I think even just pausing there, I think because that's a really this conversation comes up a lot around any illness or disease where people will give like unsolicited advice. That is the piece. It feels like a disconnect. When people give you advice or send you something that's different from where you are, it illuminates the fact that you are alone in this, because if you weren't, then they would know exactly where you are.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And that that exacerbates the sense of isolation instead of alleviates it. Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I've seen others deal with that as well. It's very frustrating and very scary. It makes you feel that sense of isolation really amps up that sense of fear.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Which makes it harder to talk about.
exactly. It
That's
becomes
like
yeah.
why what you're saying, once we kind of can come down, find our sense of calm, find our sense of compassion, find all of these things that help us stay true to who we are, which is scary. Then we can have these conversations. It's not like, you don't just say to the person, you're a terrible person for sending me this news article. You say like, hey, I know you were trying to like connect with me, but it just that gives me a false sense of hope, or you can and not everyone's going to be receptive to that. They might get defensive. Well, I was just trying to,
Mhm.
and then again, that's where the therapy piece comes in, because how do you navigate these conversations? It's pretty individualized based on the relationship you have with the person who's saying it, the relationship you have with what's going on right now. It is a very individualized process, but the more we do stay true to ourselves and hold these boundaries, which can change, like you said, in 6 months, it might be different. And then I can come to you and say, hey, this has changed a little bit. And we can engage in this way or that way. So, yeah.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And then that "what do I need" question is also on the part of the loved one. They're confused. They're probably more confused because they're not experiencing it. So to say like, I need from you to understand better what you're going through. I need for you to have patience when I forget to pick up the thing off of the floor, right? And which to the other person is a threat to their safety. Like, it's a big, big deal. And then to the loved one, it's just like, I just left the dishwasher open. It's not that big a deal. Like, but it is a big. And so coming together and expressing those needs and having patience for understanding why it's a big deal, and how when the other person forgets, like that can be taken very personally, like, because it represents such a big factor for them. So having those really open, honest, genuine, empathetic conversations is crucial, and it's tough. It is tough. So I think family sessions sometimes are really useful for that. So yeah, I think you asked what advice. Communication is probably my biggest piece of advice. Yeah.
Letting go, defensiveness.
Yeah.
Person who has low vision or is blind, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but they have a more of a right to say like, no, like you have to keep the dishwasher closed. Like this isn't even a non-negotiable. This is a non-negotiable. Like, we can have a conversation about it and be compassionate about it. But if you get defensive as a family member about that, you have to work in therapy on your own to figure out why that is, because there's the emotional side and there's the logistical side, and safety comes first for all of us, right? So
Right. Yeah, that's that classic Maslow question. I mean, if you don't feel safe in your own home, how can you work on the other stuff? It's impossible. Um, yeah. So the other, I think when people are dealing with this, there's a lot of issues around identity as well. Um, we For a lot of folks, they feel like they've lost any opportunity for their career. And so I mean, if you've been a photographer that's likely not going to be in your future again, right? And so coming to accept the realities without sort of this pie in the sky optimism that I think a lot of people, especially a lot of kids, get from well-meaning adults. Oh, you can do anything or be anything. I like to normalize the fact that everybody's got things that are foreclosed to them for various reasons. And I had to learn pretty early, like I'm going to be legally blind. I'm never going to be an airline pilot. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to be a neurosurgeon. It is not going to happen. And you have to grieve that any loss of dreams that might come with that, or the loss of your career identity, which in our society is such a big deal. Um, and then you're faced with, well, what am I going to do, and what is so often, what am I going to be? Um, that question is terrifying. And honestly, that's one of the reasons I became a counselor, because this was a field that I thought I could be good at and I could do with a vision impairment. And it's but that was a hard thing to navigate, hard thing to find.
Yeah, you mentioned in your pre-interview form you used to do some different things. Can you talk about your job transitions and how it was impacted by low vision?
Yeah, I was I like to tell people I was the only legally blind lighting designer you're likely to ever meet. I worked doing both the technical and the artistic side of lighting design for stage productions, concerts, theater, things like that. Um, and I was good at it, and I really enjoyed it. I loved that marriage of science and art, which I think is also we also see in counseling. I think that's a theme from my life, my narrative. Um, but I also am always the first to acknowledge, and I take great, I guess, comfort in acknowledging that I didn't do that alone. I was able to do that not because I somehow found a solution to every problem within myself. I did it because one of the skills that I employed was to build a team around me and to do that communication. What do I need? This is a part of the job I can do. This is a part of the job I can't do. Can you help me with this? And so it was really, I mean, I wasn't successful. It was a team that was successful. Um, not maybe a little bit because of, but largely because in spite of, or because I overcame a limitation by leaning on the strengths of others. Um,
I love that.
and that took some time because my own journey at the beginning of it, when I was much younger, the inclination was, and this comes up with my clients all the time, the inclination was, I don't want to reveal that I've got a limitation. I don't want to be defined by my vision. My disability is largely an invisible disability rather than a visible one. I don't employ a cane. I don't wear dark glasses. And for the most part, I can move around without you knowing that I've got a vision impairment. Um, so earlier in my journey, that ability to avoid disclosure, I enjoyed, and I kept it that way, and I delayed it as long as possible because to disclose really felt like a threat to my identity. And I didn't know this at the time. This is looking like this is my own my own work to go back and go, this is what I was grappling with, and it makes sense that I was grappling with that. Um, because to define yourself in somebody else's eyes, or to fear that your definition in somebody else's eyes is going to be that you are your vision impairment, you are being blind,
Yeah.
that's a threat to your own self-identity. It's a like that it's a threat to connection. So I delayed that communication as long as I could possibly get away with it. And then I'd say in my 30s, I started to say, it seems like things get easier when people know what I'm dealing with.
Mm.
Um,
It felt like a threat to connection, but the real threat was staying invisible.
yeah, and I think, and this is maybe a subtle distinction. I I don't frame it as, the real threat was there all along, right? I think the threat was the threat. I think the
Mhm.
threat changed.
I
Uh,
love
so initially the threat was, I mean, in my emerging adulthood, I was trying to form my own identity. And in my teenage years, I was trying to form my own identity. So for others to swoop in and define me was a legitimate threat to my own growth. So I
Mhm.
think the delay in the disclosure was probably a healthy thing at that stage. Once I was secure in who I was, then it became not a safety mechanism, it became a mechanism for distance.
Uh,
So I had to shift, and I didn't have to, but I chose to shift towards saying, now, I mean, gosh, at this point where I'm almost 50, now I look for opportunities. I actively look for opportunities as early in a relationship as possible to slip in the fact that I've got a vision impairment.
yeah,
It's polar opposite of when I was 18,
right.
because
I
now
love that
it,
distinction. It's so important. Yeah, it wasn't the threat has changed because we change as we grow older and we shift into different identities. And
yeah,
that's an important point.
yeah. So um, so we talk a lot about disclosure. And I mean, and what I was just talking about is this very overt sort of like actively telling people, but there's lots of forms of disclosure. Um, it is, for example, there's an enormous emotional package that comes with the use of a cane. For some people, it is a way to say, hey, I need help. Hey, please don't hit me with your car. It's a way to say, you need to be cautious around me because I can't see you, which
Mhm.
is a safety thing. It can also be the exact same thing can be turned on its head. And the use of the cane for a lot of people is I am I am a mark. And if there's somebody out there that wants to do me harm, the cane is basically an invitation. You can totally get away with it. And so I'm not just vulnerable because I can't see, I'm vulnerable because I can't see, and every bad guy in the world knows it. So the cane is a billboard that says, please mug me. So safety can go either way. It's a double-edged sword. But the cane is a it is a sign. It is a completely overt, not at all subtle sign that says, I've got a vision impairment and everybody around me is going to know it. And that is a communication of a very intimate thing in a very public way, that requires a lot of processing. That's not simple. Um, so we spend a lot of time on disclosure in that way, but also just how to communicate what I need and what I don't need, and whether that's to a complete stranger or to your most significant other. These boundaries are very different. So we have to navigate them all differently, and they do change with time. So we spend a lot of time on the topic of disclosure.
Yeah, that's so important. You've really articulated well the different phases and stages and how these things change and how that's okay. I think that's a big part of it too, is we work so hard to form identities or form boundaries or form needs and verbalize those needs. And when they change, it can feel like you're going to have to do this whole mountain of work all over again because it was so hard to do it the first time.
Right.
Usually it's not as hard the next time because you have experience with the process and it does get easier and you know more of who you are. And but there is that initial fear of like, I can't go through that again. That was way too hard.
Yeah. And the
So
people around you have been through it. So you've got more support and more resources as you go through whatever the next iteration is, if it is a progressive loss. And then they're also working through, with regard to the other people, so often family role changes. Um, I don't know why, but I've noticed that it seems like so many of the folks that I'm working with um, have a history of being in their family the problem solver. Um, it seems not everybody's the problem solver, but it seems like almost 100% of people with vision impairments have been the problem solver. I don't quite understand the math behind that, but
I wonder if that's just the ones that are coming to therapy. That tends to be true across the board.
that could be a little self-selection going on there. But yeah, so we have to, like, there's a great deal of mourning. Like, if I can't be the problem solver in the way that I'm used to, then who am I in my family? What value do I offer? And so we have to start saying, well, was your value in the fact that you took your cousin to basketball practice, or was the value that you communicated to your cousin that they were important to you? Like, and that was just the way you did it. And we can come up with a different way to do the same thing. Like, what is
Absolutely.
your value has not changed. The way you express that value might have to. But those changing family roles is that often is a really challenging hurdle that folks face.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's that values piece.
Mhm.
Work on with clients, and that's a really, really good example too. How do you get the same how do you just show people that they're valuable? Not everybody gets that in their life. So before it was driving them to basketball practice, and now it's, letting them know you see them metaphorically, right? Like
Right.
their accomplishments or their emotions or yeah.
Yeah. And I think you hit on something there that I wasn't even thinking about mentioning today, but this has come up many times. This notion of when I lost my vision, I felt completely blind and alone and isolated and in the dark. But through time, through doing the work, folks end up expressing to me, like, actually, I think I see myself and others more clearly than I ever have before. Like the vision comes back. It's just a totally different kind. And that's really rewarding. And it is still it instills a ton of hope. It's like the hope is no longer in the newspaper clipping. Now the hope is in like how can I contribute in a way that might be more meaningful than it ever would have been had it just stayed, trips to basketball practice. Now it's like, oh, okay, I can connect with people in a whole new way. I can really see them in a way I've never seen before, and they can see me in a way that that I've never been seen before, and the connections become even more meaningful. And I guess that's the resilience component: is through struggle we gain something, um, and that's really hard to see at the beginning, but when it clicks into place down the road, it's profound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've never talked about this concept on the podcast, but we've never talked about blindness, vision loss. My dad is blind. He it was in a motorcycle accident when he was in his 30s. I was 11. And it's so interesting to hear um, all of the themes you've mentioned have come up in one way or another between me and him and for him. And um, yeah, so my brain is I am feeling a little bit disconnected, almost connected and disconnected, because I'm like in my head about my own experiences with my dad, and I've just never processed this before. So as you know, when you process something for the first time, you can be flooded with emotion. Um, and I guess I'm sharing this so that client or the audience knows, like, it can this yeah, I'm flooded with the emotion of this experience because I've never processed it before, and that's okay if that happens for you too. um and,
Yeah,
and then we process that, we work through that with our therapists, and by being in community, and I'll probably call my dad later.
that's great. It's another form of connection. Yeah, that flooding is just parts of you that are knocking on the door asking to be given some attention,
Yeah,
and that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
yeah,
So yeah, I'm curious, if you don't, I didn't
sure.
ask permission to talk about this. I don't want to intrude, but as a daughter, um,
Yeah,
would you be open to talking about your experience with having a visually impaired parent?
yeah. My dad is amazing. He is, and it's funny because I don't steer toward like I don't help clients try to be super positive about their experience. I feel like you have to really move through grief. Don't kind of, but my dad is just so positive. Like he always has been. He's never ever felt sorry for himself, and it would have been fine if he did go through a phase like that. But if he did, he also didn't share it with me, which I think shows an appropriate level of like parent to child dynamic that
Right.
not every child gets. And so I appreciate that because I wouldn't have been able to navigate that at such a young age. Um, but yeah, my dad, lots of things have come up over the years, like when I got married or now I have a kid, and just knowing that he can't see what we look like feels so incredibly hard, even though we share so much of our life, right? So there's that piece of like, you don't have to see me to know me. Like you don't have to physically see me to know me, but that's there. That grief is there. Um, and it's something that I really do grapple with over and over and over and over again. It is not a one time. I've accepted my dad is blind, and now I'm all is good and all is well. Every time there's a new milestone, for some reason, that's a very prominent thing in my head. Like, he can't see what I look like. He can't see my smile. He can't see what my kid looks like. And she changes, she's 2. So babies change every week. They look like a different person. So it's a reminder. And we FaceTime with my dad because it's important for my daughter to see him,
Hmm.
even though he can't see her. And she engages more with the phone and with talking if she can see a face. If it's just like speakerphone, she she just gets, she's 2, so she doesn't care. She's not even 2, actually. And so yeah, those are things that we do to kind of navigate that. Yeah. You feel free to ask anything.
Yeah, you mentioned that he can't see your smile. Um, I don't know if you've encountered this before, but I bet this will be intuitive once you hear me say it. He can hear your smile.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's true. You can always tell when someone's like smiling on the phone or yeah.
Yeah, I've had a number of clients, and I feel this way myself, talk about how they're they find themselves picking up on others' emotions differently than others around them because they're focusing on different things. They're focusing more on what they hear than on what they see.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily the words, not the denotative content that's coming out of somebody's mouth. It's they're picking up on these micro expressions that are audible
Yeah.
that a lot of folks don't even notice because they don't need it. And I think there's a misconception, there's a myth that, and I'm sure everybody's heard this, that when you lose one sense, your other senses get stronger to make up for it. There's no science to support that at all. But what there is evidence of is that when one sense gets diminished, you gain the skill in paying attention to the other senses more.
Yeah.
So we do fill in the gaps to whatever extent we can. And so that's why I think it's important to point out that he can definitely sense your smile, even if it's not with his eyes.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I love to share this. I mean, it's a little bit of probably inspiration porn, which for people who don't know what that means, when somebody with a disability does something really great, everyone's like, look, if they can do it, you can do it too. And that can be really damaging in a lot of ways. But my dad, he paints because he lost his eyesight when he was 34. And so he had a history, a lifetime of seeing color and landscape, and he was a carpenter. And so he really likes to work with his hands. And he does require support in that. Obviously, someone has to, he's also paralyzed waist down. So he has to have someone set up the easel and the paints and tell him what color he's using. And, then the rest is all by touch for him. But, and he'll like paint one layer of a landscape and then let it dry. And so in all honesty, he doesn't have enough support to do that. Like he can't paint every day. He paints like, I think at one point he was trying to do like once every 2 weeks, and now it's probably like once every 6 months I'll hear that he picked up a paintbrush. So that goes back to the community piece and how important support is. I think that he would probably benefit a lot from a lot more support. He's in Connecticut, I'm in Georgia, so I've tried over the years, I've tried to like find volunteers from an art school. Like I've tried to think about different ways to get him more exposure to that, but just has never panned out. But he
Right.
does paint, and they're pretty cool paintings. Usually, yeah, they're always landscapes of some sort.
That's very cool. I imagine that's a nice touch point if you could have those paintings in your home for your daughter to grow up with.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
that's a really beautiful way to bridge the gap, the geographic gap. So I think that's very cool. And then you're right that we to avoid the inspiration porn that oh my God, he's amazing.
Yeah,
Like, no, you're just human and we all just do stuff and we're just human.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Are there any other themes that you've noticed that we haven't touched on?
Um, I think one other theme that probably is fairly intuitive but is worth noting is another aspect of isolation being the driving. We live in a culture where driving is so central to our experience. Um, and when that's taken away or never offered, that has a, and I mention this because I think it's really crucial for loved ones to acknowledge and to be aware of how big of a deal that is for folks. It's not just, it's not the same as I can't do this other thing, or it's a special category in our culture at least. So I think it's worthy of just taking a moment and acknowledging how hard that is to lose that sense of freedom. Um, and that also is what it's like to be in the car, even when somebody else is driving. I face driving anxiety because while the driver may know that the car that's coming up, they've been watching it for the last minute. For me, it's like suddenly right there, and it's at 60 miles an hour. That's very anxiety provoking. So I have to just constantly be kind of like calming myself and validating my emotions and doing all the work that I try to do with clients, but it's hard to do for yourself.
Yeah. Do you find a difference, like if you're driving with a calmer driver who maybe has like a very long and slow stop time versus someone who kind of hits on the brakes?
Absolutely. And that goes back to the communication piece of saying, hey, this is what I need right now. So I'm not terrified the entire drive to our weekend trip, you know.
Yeah.
And really I will request, like, if it's not a big time difference, can we take back roads instead of the highway? Uh,
Yeah.
it just I actually kind of like it when there's heavy traffic because it forces us to slow down. So,
Right.
um, but but yeah, that component I think is deserves special mention.
Yeah,
Is yeah, and
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, especially
Other than that, I think we probably touched on everything that was on my list coming into the conversation.
awesome. Well, this has been, I hope it's as touching for me. I mean, for everyone as it was for me. I know I had a huge personal like experience with this conversation. But it was really you had a lot of clarity too in your points. And I think that's always really helpful for an audience to hear. So thank you so much for the
Yeah,
organization
you
and the
and thanks
conversation.
for your sharing your personal aspect of it. I appreciate that. I know that wasn't the intent going in, so thanks for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope it helps someone.
Sure it will.
Well, thanks, Matthew, and we'll see each other soon.
Alrighty, bye bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening. If you learned something new today, consider writing it down in your phone notes or journal and make that new neural pathway light up. Better yet, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a DM on Instagram, email me, or leave a voice memo for us to play on the next show. The way you summarize your takeaways can be the perfect little soundbite that someone else might need. And lastly, leaving a review really helps others find this podcast, so please do if you found this episode helpful. And P.S., clicking subscribe ensures you'll be here for the next episode. See you then!